You know those articles you shared about Zelensky and Trump? Well, they really got us thinking, like, what if these two actually went head to head? Especially with everything going on in Ukraine.
No, that'd be something else.
Yeah.
Zelensky, fighting for his country's survival. And Trump, the America First guy, always going his own way, especially when it comes to people like Putin.
And the source material we're looking at today, it throws them all into a room together. Zelensky, Trump, and even J.D. Vance, Trump's VP. Vance is all about getting with Putin and making a deal. Can you imagine the tension?
It'd be off the charts. But keep in mind this diplomacy first thing. It basically means making a deal with Putin, even if Ukraine has to give up something. No wonder Zelensky's a bit on edge about it.
Yeah, no kidding. This hypothetical meeting jumps right into the thick of things. No small talk. Vance comes right out and says it. Trump's strategy is straight up negotiating with Putin to stop the war as fast as possible.
And Zelensky, he doesn't hold back. Not one bit. He points to Russia, their track record. Broken promises, Crimea back in 2014. Like, what's stopping Putin from grabbing more land even after a peace deal?
That's a valid point. But Vance doesn't seem too bothered. He shoots back, saying more fighting just means more destruction in Ukraine. Diplomacy, that's the only way to save lives. He even says Zelensky's playing to the cameras instead of finding a real solution.
It's a clash of styles. You know, Zelensky's got his back against the wall. He's passionate, defiant. Vance, he's all about realpolitik. Cold, hard calculations.
It's way more than just policy, isn't it? You can almost feel the tension, the emotions flying around that room.
Oh, absolutely. And it ramps up even more when Zelensky goes after Trump's whole worldview. Tells it too simple, black and white. He even warns that going easy on Russia just emboldens them. Next thing you know, the conflict could be on America's doorstep.
How does Trump take that?
He blows up. Accuses Zelensky of risking millions of lives, tells him not to tell America how to feel. Trump's not known for taking criticism well, right? But there's a deeper issue here, too.
Go on.
Zelensky's in a tough spot. He's got to rally support from around the world, but Ukraine needs the U.S. big time. So he's got to be tough, but he can't push Trump too far either.
That's a tightrope walk, especially with someone like Trump. And it gets even trickier, right? Zelensky says something that really gets under Trump's skin. He says, we've been alone in this war.
And that sets Trump off. He goes on about the billions in aid the U.S. has already given, brings up Biden, even accuses Zelensky of playing politics. Now, Ukraine's fate is mixed up with American political trauma.
It's crazy how much U.S. politics affects things on the world stage. Zelensky, though, he holds his ground, challenges Trump, Vance, defends what Ukraine's done, all the sacrifices they've made.
And in the middle of all this arguing, there's this powerful image. Ukraine's ambassador, Oksana Markarova, her head in her hands. It's like a silent cry for help, you know. Really shows you the human cost of this whole thing.
It's a heavy image. But Zelensky standing up for himself, inspiring as it is risky, right? If he pushes Trump too far, he could lose that critical U.S. support.
Exactly. That's the dilemma. Stand strong, rally his people, get international support, but don't alienate Trump. Talk about high stakes.
And to make it even more dramatic, the meeting doesn't end with some big solution, just a chilling question. Did Zelensky's courage just doom his country? It's like Zelensky's stuck between a rock and a hard place. Stand up for Ukraine, but don't push away the U.S.
That's the thing with international relations. You want what's best for your country, but you've got alliances, global power dynamics. It's complicated, especially with the U.S. They've got their own stuff going on, their own priorities.
You mentioned earlier this whole diplomacy-first strategy could be a big shift for the U.S. Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. After World War II, the U.S. became like the world's leader, right? Protecting other countries, especially democracies, from these authoritarian regimes. Military aid, economic aid, NATO, sometimes even getting directly involved in conflicts.
So this diplomacy-first thing, putting a deal with Putin first, that's like the U.S. stepping back from that role.
Yeah, pretty much. It's more pragmatic. You know, less about jumping in, more about what directly benefits America. Maybe less willing to give unconditional support if things get too risky.
That's a huge change. What would America's allies think? Especially in Europe, a lot of them depend on the U.S. for security.
They'd definitely be worried. A lot of European countries, they see what's happening in Ukraine as a threat to them too. Like, if the U.S. is okay with Putin taking Ukraine, what's stopping him from going after someone else? It's a real test for America.
Like a domino effect. One ally loses trust, the whole system starts to crumble.
Exactly. And for Ukraine, that kind of shift from the U.S., that could be devastating. They need American help, military and financial, to fight back against Russia. Without it, it's hard to see how they could defend themselves.
This meeting, it's not just about Zelensky and Trump, is it? It's a much bigger conversation about America's place in the world, the whole global order.
You got it. Big questions. What does America owe its allies? How powerful is America really? And with climate change, economic problems, everything else going on, what should America's role be?
Those are some really tough questions, no easy answers. And Zelensky, he's facing a real dilemma right now. Let's say Trump gets back in power and goes with this diplomacy-first idea. What's Zelensky supposed to do?
He'd have to walk a very fine line, keep the U.S. on his side, even if there's less support, less guaranteed. But he can't look weak, can't give in to Putin too much. That'd make Russia bolder and hurt his support back home.
Seems impossible.
Incredibly difficult, for sure. But Zelensky's got a good reputation internationally. He could appeal directly to Americans, maybe get stronger partnerships going with other countries in Europe.
So not just relying on the U.S. anymore.
Right. More support from different places, a whole group of countries that want to see Ukraine stay independent, show the world that Ukraine's a good partner, no matter who's in charge in the U.S.
Realistically, though, could Ukraine actually stand up to Russia without the U.S. fully backing them?
Russia's got a lot of power, military and economically. That's true. But Ukrainians, they've shown how tough they are, how much they're willing to fight. That, plus help from other countries, that could still stop Russia from taking over.
So there's still hope, even if things get tougher.
History's full of smaller countries that stood up to bigger, stronger ones. It's never easy, lots of sacrifice, but it can be done. Plus, things change all the time. Pressure from other countries, economic stuff, even what's going on inside Russia, that all matters.
This hypothetical meeting, it's really opened my eyes to how complicated things are in Ukraine. It's way more than just one conflict. It's about global alliances. Who has the power, the whole system the world runs on.
And leaders, people like Zelensky and Trump, the decisions they make, those matter. One decision made in a tense moment, like in that meeting we talked about, that can change things for years to come.
So much uncertainty, such high stakes. What's the main thing you want our listener to take away from all of this?
First, remember, things change all the time. Don't get caught up in simple explanations or predictions. Stay informed. Second, those personal relationships between leaders, those really matter. They can change policies, diplomacy, the whole game.
And last, Ukraine. It's just one part of a much bigger global fight. Are democracies strong enough together? Do international groups actually work? Will everyone stick to the rules?
We're living in a historic time. The choices people like Zelensky and Trump make, those will have consequences for everyone. It's up to all of us to pay attention, learn what's going on, and stand up for what we believe in.
It's a lot to take in, but so important. This has definitely given me a lot to think about. We've talked about how U.S. foreign policy might change, the pressure on Zelensky, what it all means for global alliances. But I'm still stuck on Zelensky standing up to Trump in that meeting. Is there a way that actually helps Ukraine, even if it causes problems with the U.S.?
It's an interesting thought. What if, instead of seeing changes in U.S. policy as a bad thing, Zelensky uses it to get support from other places?
Not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Exactly. Zelensky being strong against Russia, not letting them push him around, that might appeal to other countries that are also worried about what Russia's doing.
Countries like Poland, the Baltic states, they've already been pretty supportive of Ukraine. They know what it's like to deal with Russia.
Right. And Zelensky being a strong leader, that might encourage even those countries in Europe that have always been a little hesitant about Russia to do more, send more military stuff, more economic help.
So instead of depending on the U.S., Ukraine could have a whole group of countries backing them up, countries that want to see Ukraine stay free.
That's the idea. It wouldn't be easy. Zelensky would have to do a lot of diplomatic work. But in the long run, that could be a much better way for Ukraine to get the support it needs.
I can see how that could work.
Yeah.
But how would that kind of support actually play out? What would it look like?
Well, you might see more military help from places like the UK, France, Germany. Maybe they'd even send some of those more advanced weapons Ukraine has been asking for.
Yeah.
Economically, maybe stronger ties with the EU, more trade, more investment in things like infrastructure.
And wouldn't that also make Ukraine less vulnerable to whatever happens in U.S. politics? If the U.S. decides to be more isolationist, Ukraine wouldn't be left high and dry.
Exactly. Having strong relationships with lots of different countries would give Ukraine options. They wouldn't be completely dependent on the U.S. It'd give them more power to make their own choices.
It's a bold move, but Zelensky's already taking a risk by standing up to Trump in that meeting. He's basically betting that other countries will see his courage and want to help Ukraine.
And that's what makes this whole thing so fascinating. We're watching history happen right now. What Zelensky does, it could change everything. It shows that even when things seem impossible, one person can make a difference, can shift the balance of